Greetings from a fishing village on the Atlantic coast. You've tuned in to podcast Portwenn, celebrating the world of Doc Martin unofficially. I'm Chesla Wechsler, and we'll be discussing Doc Martin, the medicine, the mayhem, and the marvelous people of Portwenn. Welcome to podcast Portwenn. Today, Doc Martin fan worlds collide in that this podcast is about Doc Martin fan fiction. I'll be handing over the hosting duties to Lisa, the retired psychologist, who was my guest for the Psychology of Portwenn series. She'll host a conversation among fan fiction authors Kathy, Rob, and me. You know us online as KEO212, RobSpace54, and ccwex. Kathy and I have written exclusively for Doc Martin, writing 5 and 11 stories respectively, whilst Rob has written stories for more than 10 different properties, a whopping 45 for Doc Martin alone as a solo writer, and 3 more as one of the Portwenn Hydra. Lisa has not only been a reviewer for the psychology aspects of my writing, but is a creator herself. You can see her writing at dancingwiththepain.org. Rob had some technical difficulties throughout much of our session, so please excuse some of the rough transitions. First off, thanks to Dominic Minghella, Martin Clunes, and Philippa Braithwaite for creating Doc Martin and forming the environment that allowed so many actors, writers, directors, craftspeople, dogs, and dog trainers to thrive. Second, thanks to Buffalo Pictures for allowing us to flex our creative writing muscles using their characters. Third, this podcast and fan fiction are free. There are only rare exceptions where money can be charged for fan fiction, with Chris Morris's Battling Demons books being the only approved one that I know about. That money goes to specific agreed-upon charitable causes. I also got permission to advertise for Buckham Fair on the podcast, so there's a short on that, so please check that out. That's going until August 2nd. If you could throw a couple of bucks there, that'd be great. Let's get started. Come through. So, who am I? I'm Chesla Wechsler. I've been a Doc Martin fan since 2023, and before I created podcast Portwenn, I started writing Doc Martin pseudo-episodes or fan fiction in the fall of 2024. Kathy, why don't you give yourself a quick introduction?
Yes, I've been a Doc Martin fan since 2011 when I finally just ran across it and started watching. Then I started writing fan fiction in 2016, I think. And I've been to Port Isaac 4 times to watch filming, and that's my Doc Martin bio.
Very good. How about you, Rob?
I discovered Doc Martin in 2011 on our local PBS station, and I was intrigued by this guy and what's going on. At the same time, previously I'd already been writing some fan fiction for some other properties, and it just like, why don't I write a Doc Martin fanfic? And it just went from there. It was a slippery slope. I never came back.
Very cool. Right. Lisa, how about you?
Oh, I learned about Doc Martin from Chesla and started watching it just a few years ago. And one of the reasons I wanted to participate today is that I just love amplifying people's creativity and their gifts. So I'm very much looking forward to learning more about you and your process today. Thank you.
Very cool. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Lisa here. She's going to be our moderator, and I get to just be a guest.
Why did you like the show so much, Kathy?
That's a very difficult question to answer. It's one I've been asking myself since I first started watching it. I found the Doc incredibly intriguing. You know, what was motivating this man to behave the way he did? But really, it's the whole package. It's the village, the scenery, the music, the characters, the plot lines. And I mean, even recently, just last night, I was watching a couple of episodes. It's a comfort show. I watch it when I'm stressed out. I'll watch a little Doc Martin. Make me feel good.
Would you agree with that, Rob? Or would you like to add what drew you to the show? And
Definitely, yeah. As I said, I found it on PBS. I think they were playing Series 2, and here he was with, the Doc was with Louisa and Danny, and they're breaking into Carolyn Bosman's house. And of course he rescues Carolyn. And it was like, what is going on? There's interesting dynamic between these characters. And who is this guy? You know, he's odd, but he appears to be a good doctor. And clearly the tension between Martin and Louisa and Danny was just so evident. I said, I got to know more about this. And went from there.
I should add that the very first episode that I saw was the one where his parents, in Series 2, where his parents came to visit. And, you know, watching his mother just excoriate him, you know, he was like, oh my goodness, what kind of a show is this? And I was immediately pulled in.
So it was very dynamic and very alive and very complex at the same time and comfortable in another way. How about you, Chesla?
I had the advantage of picking up basically from the very first show. You know, I was told by my cousin who knew I liked Seaside Hotel, which is another ensemble cast thing that's set in a beautiful shore location. She's like, you'll love this thing. And we started watching season 1, episode 1, and we watched it straight through in a very short amount of time. Started in 2023. It got us through the end of COVID. It was a really good comfort show, as Kathy said. And part of it could be because I am a nerd, and I identify with sort of the outcast kind of strange person. And so, yeah, Chris and I, my husband and I, were both nerds. We were just immediately hooked.
So why did you decide to write fan fiction? Go ahead, Chesla. Yeah.
I guess I have to give Rob a lot of credit because I was reading some of his story. Actually, I read everything that was out there when the series ended. I was just so bummed that I had gotten through all of the series and it was done and there would be no more, that I started reading the fan fiction. Rob is extremely prolific, and I wanted to actually give you kudos, Rob. One of the people who submitted a question just wanted to say and tell Rob that he's amazing. So we communicated, and you just said, why don't you give it a try? And I had not really given any thought to that because you were an engineer, I was a software developer. I was like, well, this engineer could pull off some fiction, why not me? And that's why I started.
What do you
Nerds
think, Rob?
do know how to write. Nerds can write.
Yes.
Well, okay, so I had been reading a lot of science fiction as I do, and there were some novels by big names, and it's like I got to the last page and it just ended. I thought, what? They must have hit the deadline and they just stopped. And I was unhappy with too many of those. I said, well, why don't I write my own? So I started writing some fanfic just kind of on the fly about Star Trek, about Magnum PI, and I discovered Doc Martin. Well, why don't I write a story about Doc Martin? And I think my first one was Doc Martin at night. And there's almost no dialogue. He's just in bed at night and he's thinking about how the day has gone. It's always a disaster. It's always a mess. And he's, eating his heart about it, this and that. And running through his mind is, there's this teacher, Louisa Glasson, and he can't get her out of his head. And he just needs to see her every day. And it just kind of went from there. And eventually I learned how to write dialogue and how people interacted on the page. And I don't know, it's been a lot of fun. It's really turned me into being able to put words on paper and tell a decent story, I think.
So, Kathy, it sounds like they couldn't let the characters go. They needed to continue, and that's what started them. How about you?
That's true. I started writing, I guess, I can't remember, 2016. I had been reading, I'd read pretty much all of the fan fiction up to that point because, I was waiting for the next series to be filmed, and I was like, I gotta get my Doc Martin fix. So I read everything that was out there, and I was reading it. It's like, I could write this. I could do better than these people. It's not that I am. And then we have here in the DC area, we have a Doc Martin group, and we were having lunch one time, and Boots 1980, Rob, you'll know who she is, let it slip that she was writing fan fiction, and I thought, oh, this brilliant woman, and she's writing fan fiction. Maybe it's not such a crazy thing to do. So, but I wrote reports when I was working. I was an actuary, a consultant, but I never wrote any fiction. So I said, well, let me give it a try. And my very first story was called No Time. It was basically when she was going to the airport, leaving him, and he was like, I got to get her off that plane. And so what was going through their minds as they were talking, it was very short, maybe 2,000 words, but I got a lot of feedback from the readers who really liked it. And I thought, well, maybe I can do this. And that's how it started. And I love it. I loved writing it. It was like the best thing that ever happened to me.
Oh, nice.
And I think it's interesting that all three of us are kind of nerdy.
Yeah.
I'm a math major, so mathematics is my thing.
I was just going to ask that question about being the nerd, because Rob said that too, and why you think you're drawn to this, being a nerd.
Something I was good at. I never thought I was particularly verbal. When I'm around a group of people, I'm usually the quiet one. I'm just sitting there listening and observing. It overwhelms me when there's too many people around. I can't think very fast on my feet. So I never thought of myself as being verbal. I always thought of myself as kind of a geeky person. And I was the kind of kid who did other people's geometry homework for them because it was so much fun. And they just thought, what is wrong with her?
What do you think, Chesla?
I think part of it is nerds, I guess, have a little reputation of having social skill problems sometimes, right? Character, who the whole show is written around having social skills problems, and he comes to town, and he's the elite that comes to town, and it's not I'm gonna laugh at these people, it's these people all laugh at him. And I think, maybe, certainly just speaking for myself, you kind of get this a little identifying with the character. I've said that my writing has been therapy. I've thoroughly enjoyed being able to sort of morph this character, express myself some in this character, but keep him very close to what he is in the show, because that's kind of my goal. But yeah, it's like I'm living a little bit more through this guy than I maybe allow myself to live, as far as working some things out with other people. So it's just, I don't know, part of what I got out of it.
And it's an interior process. So you're getting to be very verbal and social and relational all in the writing. What do you find, Rob? What made you say that about the nerd, being a nerd? And
okay, well, as an engineer, I always wrote a lot of reports for our internal customers as well as external customers. And, stringing words together and communicating, that's how it works. And then it was like, here's Doc Martin. He's a very technical person. And I'm thinking, I'm a technical person. And so I was kind of drawn to him. I mean, I have an MD and as my spouse who's sitting in the background here. So I just wanted to explore what he was thinking, what he was doing. And there's that soft, squishy side of him that he doesn't want to show to anyone. His affection for Louisa. And there clearly is it starts out, of course, very antagonistic. But she sees he's a value, and he's thinking, well, she's not just a teacher. She's probably the smartest person in town, other than me. it just kind of goes from there, and clearly it's that. And then you get that romantic arc, which, is written through the entire piece. As well as, the beautiful landscape of Port Isaac, Portwenn, and the quirky things that happen and the people who were there. And every one of them has a story to tell. And I thought, there's stuff there. There's a lot of good meat. And of course, in fan fiction, somebody else has done the hard work of creating that universe and the characters. We don't have to describe what the plot looks like. We don't have to make that up. There it is, what the doc's office looks like. We know what it is. So you can just walk onto that stage and just start playing with the characters. And it was a good way for me to stretch my writing muscle, if you will, in my head. So, and get more into the fiction area. So that was good.
Kathy, you and I were both nodding on that, because I don't know about how you guys feel, but I think a lot of people feel like I could write a book, but you have no idea where to start. Like, it's just so intimidating because you have to create all this stuff. And to start writing this, it was like, all these people, everyone knows what they look like. Everybody knows what the setting is. They know how they talk. They know how they dress. I feel like I know these people. Therefore, it was just a low barrier to entry.
That's exactly right. They've set everything up for you. And it's almost like the lazy author's way of writing, because you've got it all there first.
Now, I will mention, though, that given fan fiction, I know of a lot of fan fiction authors who are now or have written stories for publication or working on novels, etc. And so, yeah, it's a good training ground for anybody who, how do I write a story? How do I write dialogue? Mm-hmm. How do I describe a scene? And that's a fun thing to do, to be honest.
This is so interesting. The next question I was going to ask you was how you would describe your writing, and part of the answer to the question you've already answered. But I wonder what else you might add, if anything, describe.
Well, I once wrote a story where it was all from the viewpoint, well, the first half, all from Martin's viewpoint. And then in the middle, I switch it to her viewpoint. So I write his going forward and hers going backwards as an experiment. But I hadn't diagrammed the first half of the story. So I was having to go back and reread parts of it and make notes on Post-it notes, because how she was reacting to things that he was doing in the past. And it was just a crazy way to do it, but it was kind of fun. And then somewhere in there, one of those stories, I was writing the story from the viewpoint of Buddy, a chapter from the dog's viewpoint. Louisa's just had the baby. She's moved in with the doc, and there's Buddy, and he's like, the lady with the baby, the gruff man. But I really like him, and it was like this putting my head into this other creature, and what would he think in the world, and the things that he smelled, and the things that he thought. And anyway, it was fun. It was just kind of different. And then I went back to the humans and the rest of the story. So.
Sounds just as you say, like you get to play when you're writing. It's playful for you. Play with these characters. How would you describe your writing, Kathy?
I have to be by myself, and I actually go into the scene. I basically live there, and I'm like observing what they're doing. And I don't always know where it's going to go. I used to laugh at authors who would say, well, I never expected the story to end up this way. I thought it was going to go here, and it went there. And it's like, I thought, yeah, right. Well, that's what happens. You start writing, and the characters tell you, well, this is what I want to do. You need to let me do this. It's like, okay, go there. And it is, as Rob says, it's a lot of fun. And I mean, I write no matter where I am. I mean, I can't tell you how many chapters, plot lines I've developed while swimming laps in the pool, sort of just going through my head. What are we going to do next? Taking a walk. But when I sit down to actually write, I have to be by myself. I can't do it with anyone else around or any other noise.
So, Chesla, I want to hear how you describe your writing process, but I noticed with how Kathy and Rob answered, there's a tremendous amount of you're in these worlds. And I do think your backgrounds probably have helped that, because you each have said that you spent your work lives doing a lot of thinking. So I wonder what you might add in terms of how you describe your own writing process.
I would say that these people live rent-free in my head. It's kind of like what Kathy was saying, like, I just have to write them. I live in them. They live in me. George R.R. Martin had described writing as there are people who are architects and there are people who are gardeners. And, I think the architect will frame everything out. They'll know exactly where their story is going, and then they'll just build upon that structure. And the gardeners are just going out there and, tending and seeing what grows and weeding here and there and planting over here. And I'm absolutely a gardener. I might have a goal or an idea, but I have no idea how I'm going to get there, and I don't even know if I am going to get there. But I do immerse myself in the character. I have to be by myself when I'm doing my writing, but I'm thinking about plot lines, or actually, I'm not thinking about plot lines. They're just coming into my head unbidden, and then I'll just, that'd be good. So yeah, that's kind of how it goes.
So, Chesla, do you have any goals or rules when you set out in your writing that you followed?
When I set out, I absolutely wanted to keep the characters true to themselves. Like I kind of pretend that I'm an undiscovered writer for the series. If Philip is not happy with what I write, then it's not good, right? So, I would want it to be everybody acts the way you expect. People say the things that you expect. But at the same time, one of the things that was great about the show was how unexpected it could be, right? So I wanted my characters to be completely consistent. When people read the stories, they feel like this is an episode that just hasn't been filmed yet. And my goal for my very first foray into writing, which I thought was going to be a story, but it ended up being 8 stories in a series, was to take Martin from series 1 and 2 and Martin from series 10 and morph them into sort of like a final Martin, in the sense that I felt like he lost something at the beginning. He went from being a bit more snarky and fun at the beginning to being extremely grumpy and far more silent as things went on. And then I wanted him to be able to recover his snark, but to stay as the same character that he was in season 10 too. Like it has to be plausible that he could grow into that final person. So that's what I set out to do in one story, and boy, I had no idea it would take as long as it did.
This is all so interesting. What do you think, Kathy? Do you have goals or rules that you follow with your writing?
Well, as I said, this was my first attempt to do fiction writing, and I didn't really know where to start. So I just started writing, and, to see where it would take me. And it was very rough and whatnot actually all the time. But my favorite part of writing is editing. I love to go in and edit, make it better, make sure I'm a stickler for grammar. I really have a hang up about grammar and construction. Again, that's probably the nerd in me, the geek. I want it to be constructed logically. So that's part of that. With respect to the characters, I tend to make the doc a little nicer, just because, well, most of my stories were alternate realities. They weren't actually, although the last one I wrote, Dr. Doctor, was a continuing of the story, but the first couple were completely alternate universe, and he was just a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit nicer. And Louisa wasn't quite as snarky either, so I don't stay completely true to the characters. I like to give them some growth.
I think I wanted to comment. One tool I would say that I have found incredibly handy in writing is I use Microsoft Word when I write, and I set the language to be English United Kingdom. And that helps me with my spelling of words that are slightly different, like behavior, the things that have I-O-U-R, or words that are L-L-I-N-G or L-L-E-D instead of just L-E-D. And I also use the read aloud feature, which with a British accent. And I'll tell you, it helps me find my errors, because sometimes it'll pronounce a word in a very wonky way, and I'll realize maybe that's not a word that you use in UK English. So I found that read aloud feature to be fantastic.
Well, that's a really good thought.
Yeah. And C.S. Lewis had said, advice to writers, one of the biggest things of advice he would give was make sure you read what you write aloud. And having it read aloud to me without me having to do anything, that has been huge. We're going to sort out Rob's technical issues once and for all. He's the most prolific writer. We don't want to lose him, so he will definitely be back.
I mean, where he gets his ideas is just blows my mind. I mean, I'm not that creative.
I loved Just a Glimpse. The idea of the whole thing being a dream was just amazing.
That was my first real story.
It was great.
Well,
it took me 2 years to write it.
Whoa, it's a lot of chapters, but it's,
It is. It's over 200,000 words.
Yeah, it's amazing.
it's incredible.
Because it just kept growing.
Yep.
Well, so let's talk about that. What's your favorite story that you've written?
Me?
Yeah.
My favorite story that I have written, which most fans aren't all that keen on, is The Women in His Life. And I think that's my best story, quite frankly. But most people don't read it, and I think they're put off because the very first chapter is from Margaret's, his mother's, point of view. Actually, the first couple of chapters are from her point of view. And I went into it thinking, I'm going to write a story from the two mothers. I'll write it from Margaret's point of view and from Eleanor's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And I started trying to write it, and I'm not very skilled. I could not make that work because I wanted to have other characters in, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And so I ended up just writing it in third person. But I started out with Margaret, and if she goes through the whole thing, and actually she's in the last chapter as well. If you haven't read it, then I won't tell you what happened. But then Louisa's mother is in part of it. Louisa's good part of it. Joan is in it. I just like it. It's my favorite story. I think it's my most romantic story, quite frankly. But not many people will read it. Those who do like it. But
Yeah.
But I think they're put off by Margaret at the very beginning. Because
I love that
likes
story,
Margaret?
though.
Nobody.
I
likes
know.
But I was trying to figure out what was going on with her.
I like The Women in His Life. I really enjoyed The Women in His Life.
I want to know, though, what sparked that idea for you.
The Women in His Life? What sparked it? It was a continuation of Just a Glimpse. And I wanted to know what happened, after they finally got married. And I like to write family stories. I like family dynamics. And there was a lot of family dynamics going on in The Women in His Life. So I got to explore a lot of the women in his life, what they were doing, how they approached life, how they dealt with him.
I haven't read that, but I will.
But it's a follow-up to Just a Glimpse.
Which I'm reading right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, there are 2 or 3 chapters in The Women in His Life that if I were redoing it, I would delete. I would not include in that story. But, I always tell myself, it's just fan fiction, who cares? I'm not going to go in there and change it.
Chesla, what's your favorite story that you've written?
That's hard. It's probably a tie in a way. The one that I really enjoyed writing the most was MRC Psych, which is when Ruth takes a stab at some therapy for Martin. And that was not only a fun write because of the subject matter, And I thought I took a unique approach. I'm trying not to tell people what's in it, just in case they haven't read it yet. It's got a unique approach to trying to unravel what's going on with Martin. And it's got the whole ethical concerns of working with a person in your family. You know, you're not supposed to do that. And it was also my first attempt at writing in first person and I toggle between Martin and Ruth, Martin and Ruth, Martin and Ruth. And it seemed like a therapeutic environment would be a very interesting place to do that, because it's, you know, what is she saying? What is he saying? What is he thinking about what she's saying? And it was very challenging because I had to map emotions on his face with what he was thinking, with what she was saying, with the emotions on her face, and finding exactly the right place to switch the perspective so that you're not losing what just happened, and you can map those, you know, facial expressions to the words that were being said. So that it was a really good challenge as a writer. I really enjoyed doing that one. I would say it's tied with Do Not Move a Muscle, which is my only so far interstitial piece, where you write something that you're bound by what happened before and what happened after. And you have to make something fit in the middle that is plausible and works with the whole plot and furthers it along and makes sense that would have happened. And it takes the brief amount of time between when Louisa tells Martin in the Platte, stay right there, do not move a muscle, and she goes into the Crab and buys wine for them because she wants to have a drink. And the next scene that you see of them is they're in the surgery and they are just toasted, you know, on wine, and the two of them are having that conversation. And so I wanted to write what happened in between there. How did they go from not having drunk at all to being completely drunk? And it was a challenge because of just trying to fit in. And I thought it was going to be a one chapter story, and people said, no, you have to continue this. So I wrote a second chapter and I thought it was over. And then somebody pointed out how they liked my alternative ending. And I'm like, I don't write alternative endings. I stick to the canon. What did I do wrong? And I realized I had forgotten the Christmas episode of season 2 and then the aftermath of that up until the Platte when Louisa runs into her father. And what I had written violated the canon of what happened in that show, so I couldn't end it the way I did. So then I had to recover from my own mistake and write a third chapter. And so the whole thing was very challenging. And the reaction that I got from the reviewers was great, in the sense that it was it's like I dug myself out of my hole. You know, they found it funny. So the way I'm talking now, that's got to be my favorite, you know, probably. That one takes first. Anyway, enough.
Or maybe your favorite to write.
But I thought MRC Psych was my favorite to write. But I think I think this one was my favorite to get reactions from and have to respond to the readers. You know, to readjust and write more than I expected. I ended it 3 times. I thought I was done. It's only a 3-chapter story.
I'm so impressed with people who can write in first person. I've tried it and I can't do it. I'll read it and it looks very forced.
It's hard.
It's very hard. And the same writing in present tense. I have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not a very skilled writer, but, you know.
I like what you write. I think you are. I would disagree with that.
No, I'm a skilled writer in third person, past tense. Yes, I can do that.
Why not? It works perfectly. I think most things are written in that.
I think so. But, but like you said, you want to stretch yourself as the writer. You want to try other things. And
Write a therapy session. You kind of have to write it in first person.
Well, I have a personal story that I want to write, so now that don't have anybody in my house anymore, I think I might be able to get going on that.
Okay, good luck. Lisa, what is it like to be a reader who's not an author?
It's so fun. I get to be back with the characters and marvel at your creativity and your ideas, like just even listening to what you're talking about now and your growth as writers from where you started and where you are now, the confidence that you have to write other things, what you've discovered about writing. Like you were just talking about writing in the third person in the past, Kathy. And Chesla was saying about really embodying these characters and being in their heads and saying what they're thinking, which you do also. But that's just fascinating to me, just your discovery process. And one of the other questions I wanted to ask is, Chesla, you were mentioning about the readers and the feedback. Tell me about your relationship with your readers and, how that impacts you I know we could do a whole podcast on that, but let's just pick that off.
I think Doc Martin people are good people. Let me just the people that I've interacted with through the writing, because you can leave comments on, which I encourage every reader to do. I mean, even if you just say nice chapter, or I thought this was a little odd, like anything that you can give to people that they can use to work on is great. But it's like you develop a relationship with people, and at this point, I'm going to be meeting up with 2 readers in England when I go to Buckham Fair, and I'm sure I'll meet up with many other readers there, and there'll be podcast viewers, and it's just like I love getting their feedback. I love when people give me constructive things, and I love the fact that there are people in Ukraine who read my stories, because I'm so concerned about them. We haven't had statistics on the fanfiction.net platform since January 1st, and I used to see the distribution of readers across the world. But the people in Ukraine, I'm like, you have power, you have internet, and you have a little bit of free time, and you're using it to read my stuff. And how gratified I am, and that I can provide some distraction and entertainment to people in a war zone is just amazing. I just love that. So I mean, anybody who's reading stuff, try to comment. Let us know you're out there. Let us know what you like and what you don't like. But you guys make it that much more fun, because it is fun to do, but it's really fun to get your feedback.
Yeah, feedback is our only compensation. And right now, especially since we're not getting statistics, we don't know if anyone's reading or who's reading or where they're at. And I mean, every now and then I get a comment on one of my old stories, because I haven't written anything since 2022. And it's just nice to know that people are still reading, that I'm still, as Chesla said, I'm still entertaining someone. And it's gratifying. Makes me want to go back and write another story, except, well, like I said, I have not had any time. I've been tied up with other family matters since then. But I'm getting free now, and hopefully I'll start writing something soon.
Yeah, I hope you do.
Except that, Doc Martin's is over. So how many readers are out there?
Well, clearly we all keep reading.
Yes.
Let me ask you a related question. So how did you feel when you first posted a story?
When we first posted
a chapter, what your first post, what was that like?
That was no time. And it was that short little 2,000-word story, or vignette, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I gave it a shot, and I got so much positive feedback that it was like, this is great, maybe I can actually do this. It was wonderful, and a lot of people read it. So even though it was a tiny little story, and people will, can you continue? And it's like, well, it's done, but I'll go to something else. And that's when I started just to run.
I just love this. I love hearing this. Yeah. How about you, Chesla? What was it like when you first posted your first chapter?
I have a love-hate relationship with things that sort of put myself out there. Just when I started the podcast, I was nauseous. Like, why am I doing this to myself? Why am I putting something out there that people can criticize or give me feedback that maybe I don't want to hear? Maybe it will bomb. Maybe people will say nothing about it. And so when I put my first chapter out there, I had read, I think, everything that was out there. And there's a spectrum, as in anything, of quality and interest. So I felt like I could be in the middle. And that gave me a little bit of comfort, right? That I'm not going to be the worst. I'm not going to be the best. But I can entertain people with it, and we'll see how it goes. See if anybody likes it. And same sort of thing. I got a lot of great feedback. And of course, just like now, my very first story that I put out there was just a couple chapters in when it stopped doing statistics. And it's like such a downer, because you see, oh my gosh, my chapter got X number of hits today, in these 5 countries, how cool is that? And then it stops, and now you're just dependent. So anyway, I'm not going to complain about that more, but it was very nerve-wracking. But at the same time, I felt like, well, I'm not going to be the worst. I liked the idea. I thought it had merit. I had the benefit of having the entire show behind me. But yeah, it's a risk you take. You're setting yourself up for some criticism, and thank you, readers and reviewers, for being kind. Even when there was, comments on, well, I thought this was wrong. I thought you didn't get this right from the show. It was always done kindly. But a great dopamine hit.
Most of the people who comment leave positive reviews, or they don't leave negative anyway. I think I only had maybe 1 or 2 really horrible reviews. And as a author, we can delete those. you know, reviews that profanity in them. I'm not going to leave those up, but there are only one or two of those. You know, there are some that are very critical, you know, like Chesla said, you know, you didn't get this right. Well, that's okay. You know, I'm fine with that. That's good to know that somebody's paying attention.
Yeah. And it also challenges you, doesn't it? Like, I actually had to come up with a reason why I got it wrong that was plausible. Because I am so annoyed, you know, such an anal retentive person about getting the canon right. It's like, but they did do this. And I'm like, crap, how do I make that work in a future chapter that was wrong? And so it's a challenge.
But you could always say it was just an alternate universe. I mean, you didn't get it wrong.
But I'm just not an alternate. I like to, you know, I will read them, but I just can't write them.
So you use the word canon, and you explained this to me recently, but maybe for our viewers, you could just explain that, what that is.
To me, it means I have to confine myself within just what the TV show gave us. So people should talk that way, they should act that way, they look that way, and the plot line, in my mind, I put myself up for pseudo review by Philippa Braithwaite. She read every script and she would give comments as to Martin wouldn't say this, or this doesn't sound like Ruth, or, you know, you don't need to describe that. That should just be a look, right? And so I've tried to pretend I'm a pseudo writer and she has to approve.
That's a pretty cool way of looking at it and writing for her.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't wait to meet her. I'm going to meet her in August.
She is such a lovely person.
That's great.
So what if Buffalo Pictures approached you and told you they liked your ideas? What would your response be, Kathy?
My response would be, really? And then I would want to know what it was they liked about it. Because, like I said, I'm pretty much an alternate universe kind of person. You know, it would be, what specifically did you like about that? But I can't see them coming to me and saying they like my writing. But then, you know, I'm very self-critical, so it could happen. No.
This is an alternative universe that we're living in. Buffalo Pictures comes and asks us.
What about you, Chesla?
After the administration of the smelling salts, you mean? I think first I'd probably hug them for giving us such a great show, and then thank them for letting us get away with this, because not every producer of content allows people to just play with their characters the way that we do. I would be grateful that they thought I was being respectful with their characters enough to like it, right? And hey, you want to use something? You go ahead and use it. You didn't give me any hard time about using your stuff? Go ahead. Have at it. I would, you know, give me a hat tip in the credits. Go for it. That would be great. I'd love to see it.
Rob, can Rob hear us now? What is your favorite story that you've written?
Boy, too many. Probably Right, Right.
Can you say why?
Boy, I don't know. It was long. It went on a long time. I guess I just really dug into the characters. And you know, one thing that I find over time is I don't want to make Doc too grumpy. You know, I don't want to make him too mean, especially when he's dealing with Louisa and other people. But I don't know. I, I think, I mean, that's part of the whole story arc. But the other fun is the Doc interacting with the quirky villagers, you know, and the odd problems that they have, from athlete's feet to, you know, whatever, and how he has to sort things out.
We were just talking about, Kathy was saying about writing in third person versus first person, writing in the past versus the present. And Chesla was talking about that too. How about you?
Well, third person is good because then you can have different voices. You know, you can have this character doing something, and then that character. Well, how are they reacting to it? What are they saying inside their head? And so that is neat. But I think it's in some ways I find it more interesting to just write in the first person. But then you're stuck with that character unless you change horses at midstream, or maybe do it by chapter. You know, and that does work as well. So I don't know. Sometimes it depends on what the characters are telling me to write. If you understand that.
That they spoke about that too. One of the submitted questions from a reader or a reviewer was, how do you cope with the fact that you're all playing in such a small pond? and is overlap inevitable? And has anyone ever said you stole an idea, or have you ever felt copied?
I have posted a chapter and then a friend said, "Oh my gosh, I was just going to write that. You got there before I did." So that's just serendipity. It's just not karma. That's just the way it works out sometimes. What I have found interesting though is when readers have left a comment and they go, "And when you had the doc said this, that was so amazing because it really means this other thing." And I'm going, "That's not what I didn't see that when I wrote it. I didn't think about that." But so I'm making other people think about the characters and what's happening. So, okay. I just was kind of interested by that. So anyway,
Where do your ideas come from for plots?
well, it's the what if question. What if they got married the first time, okay, and not the second? What if she wasn't pregnant? What if the doc went to London and got her out of this horrid bedsit and brought her back to Port Isaac, and that's when she tells him, "Martin, I'm pregnant." You know, uh, and it's like that puts a totally different new spin on the whole thing. So I don't know where I read it. Someone said that fan fiction is what we get when the camera is turned off. What if this happened? What if that happened? And so, yeah, we go off and create these alternate universes. Like Kathy, I think you mentioned the alternate universe. And as I really like to stay with the canon if I can, in terms of characters and settings and so on. I mean, I'm never going to put the Doc and Louisa on a starship or on a space shuttle. No, that just doesn't work, and I'm sorry. And I'm never going to put the Doc in America, in the States. No, it just doesn't work for me. But anyway, I don't know. It's just fun to write these things, and sometimes I have to admit, writing them, I can dig myself a pretty deep hole. Paint myself into a corner and say, "What do I do now?" Gosh, and I'll be sitting there. Maybe I'm in line at the market or, watching TV and go, "Oh, that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. Okay." And I have to find a post-it note and scribble on it, so I don't, or make a note in my phone so I don't forget it. And then I'm much happier. I've found a way out of the trap I've made for myself. But I tend not to write linearly, chart it all out, diagram the whole thing. Sometimes I don't really, sometimes I know where the story ends, not where it begins.
Hmm.
So that's
You're
interesting.
a gardener.
Yeah, kind of a gardener, If I know how it ends, how did they get there? And that I think is more, I don't know, maybe that can force me to be a little more creative with the characters and the setting. But I'm just glad that we all found Doc Martin. My goodness.
Yeah.
Lightning in a bottle.
What would you do, Rob, if Buffalo Pictures approached you and said they wanted to use your story or liked your ideas?
I would laugh out loud. I would be absolutely gobsmacked, to use a British term. I would be proud and surprised and just like awed.
You all should be very proud of yourselves because this is quite something that you've each developed and grown with and, fallen in love with these characters. I heard that both Rob and Kathy prefer to make Martin less mean and a little more romantic. What about you, Chesla?
Yeah, I'm just so anal about trying to keep him to be, well, given that my goal had been to take the sort of kinder, gentler, snarkier, funnier Martin of series 1 and 2 and blend him with series 10, quieter, less funny, less humorous series 10 Martin. I guess you might say that I try to make him kinder than he ended up. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm trying to make him only act in ways we've seen him act, but to blend that characteristic where he can be the rude guy who maybe doesn't say much, but he can throw a joke out there. He can smile a little bit. Because when the series ends, the last 2 episodes, the Christmas episode and the one that came before it, he's got a little smile at the end. You know, you can tell he's more comfortable with living in Portwenn. He feels like he's settled. He's chosen it. It's not that it's a place he's been made to go to in shame because he lost his vascular career. He is now in a place he chooses. So does that make him kinder? I think it just makes him recover himself some. So that's kind of where I ended up. But one thing you asked Rob earlier, Lisa, was this idea of playing in a small pond and, you know, had the overlapping stuff. I must admit, like, I consumed what was out there in fan fiction in the blink of an eye. I mean, I was just reading because I didn't want the series to end, so I was just reading. And I have very little memory of what I read. Like, some stories really stuck out to me, but it was just like I took all this stuff in. And then when I started writing, you know, I wrote what I did, and then I started rereading other people's stuff. It's like, oh, let me go see. And then I would find something like, they used astronomy. I used astronomy. Like, oh, crap. And then you realize it is a very small world, and there's some very obvious things that seem like, what's a hobby Martin might come up with? Well, what's a great solo activity that you could do on the moors? So yeah, I think you almost have to have some level of, it's not uncommon, I guess I would say, for people to come up with the same things. Now, you know, I don't think I've necessarily felt like anybody's read my stuff and stole my ideas per se, because not many people have come after me. I'm one of the more recent writers. I hope I have never stolen somebody else's idea. If I have, my apologies. It was completely unintentional, but you know, there's 79 episodes to pick from in a tiny little village. So I think some of this is inevitable. Like, you know, I guess I wouldn't want to see a recent writer just seem like they were very much using my plot line. But also, who am I to say? Like, if somebody builds on my story, am I not building on everybody else's, like the whole TV show? So, you know, can I really mind that? I don't know. That's just my thinking.
Yeah, I did not intentionally write things that other people do, but one of my plot points in, I think, Just a Glimpse, I used the song Some Enchanted Evening. And I was back, as Chesla said, you go back and you read all the old stories again and again and again. And I found somebody had used that song, and it was like, oh my word, did I pick that up from them? And I'm sure somewhere in my unconscious, maybe I picked it up from that story, but it certainly wasn't consciously. And no one's complained to me about my using it, so I think I'm okay. And then I read a couple of stories after I wrote mine, and somebody used one of my plot points. I don't even remember what it was. And I thought, well, good for them. You know, I don't care. Because as this question poses, it's a very small pond. There are only so many ideas that you can bring to it, and you just have your different take on it. Now, Rob, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, you're part of the Portwenn Hydra. And,
Yes.
And there's The Visitor. That was one of my favorite first stories that I read.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't recall that one, but okay, fine.
I can, Margaret came to visit, and she was staying with Martin and Louisa, and I don't know, Louisa, they were going to a Vickers and Tarts ball or something, and anyway.
Now I do remember that.
But it was interesting because you had, 4 or 5 different writers writing, you each take a chapter, one after another. How did that work?
Yeah.
It was interesting. So somebody would get started and do their thing, and then we would have a week after they posted their part, their chapter, we had a week or so to write our part, round robin. And we got criticized more than once for continuity errors. Well, at the end of this chapter, he's wearing a Macintosh, and then, you flip the page, and now he's just wearing his blue suit. What? Sorry. But it was just kind of an interesting way. We had been kind of chatting online and bouncing ideas off of one another. And somebody said, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we write a collaborative story? And it was interesting. Yeah, there was a lot of give and take there. And sometimes I would write, or I would read what other people had written and go, wow, that's a great idea. Oh my gosh. Now I can't let the side down. How can I carry it forward? So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And that was a long time ago. But yeah, we still stay in touch.
I'll tell you, I
Often
wish I wasn't so late to the party, because I think, there was a heyday of fan fiction for Doc Martin that I missed out on, just because I came late to the party.
Yeah, there was. That's true.
You've read them all.
No, but I mean, like, the whole, being able to comment in real time, and potentially, make at least online friendships with some of the other authors who at this point have moved on.
I'm struck with Chesla, because I know Chesla, before I've met you both, of the research that she's needed to do about different medical problems, about the language, the culture. What has been your experience of that?
I do research as well, especially with the medical stuff. And then I caveat it in my story saying, the last time I did anything medical was, Girl Scout, which back when I was 10 years old, because I don't really know anything, but I do as much research as I can. I try to avoid the medical stuff because my friend Boots, 1080 or whatever her name is, she said, "Oh, I avoid the medical stuff completely, except I frequently ask my doctors about things."
Oh, that's funny.
But, it's hard to avoid the medical stuff. So you do as much research as you can to get it as close to right as possible. And then again, like Chesla, I try to use British spelling and British words. One time one of the things I wanted to say was, I turned on a dime, and I knew that wasn't going to work in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in Port Isaac, I asked a friend and I said, "What would you say?" And he said, "Oh, you turn on a sixpence." Okay. Thank you. That helped. So, and actually I asked a number of friends in Port Isaac when I was there about different things, how I would phrase things. So that was very helpful.
How about you, Rob?
Yeah, as I said, England and America are two countries separated by a common language. So yeah, the phraseology has tripped me up more than I care to. And I usually put a disclaimer at the end saying, "Hey, I'm an American writing about, Cornish people, so if I've mangled the language, that's my fault." But as far as the medical stuff, there's this thing called Google. But like the coffee cup says, do not confuse your Google search with my medical degree, which I don't have, obviously, a medical degree. But you can find out an awful lot of stuff about, and of course, that's just fodder for Martin to give a lecture about peptides or biochemistry or whatever, vaccinations, and or arteriovenous malformations, and so that provides a wealth of information. But yeah, sometimes I have to look around and like do a search for Cornish slang about certain things. We give it maybe a little ring of what the show might sound like, but it's we're just having fun here. We're not trying to make money off of it, luckily.
And a little word to that: you can't make money off of it. You shouldn't make money off of it. You shouldn't be
That's
charging
right, yeah.
for it. It's it
doesn't work
completely
that
free.
way.
It doesn't work that way.
How
With
about
respect to research, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. With respect, I am anal retentive about researching stuff, and I do because an episode is, generally speaking, a mix of some medical stuff and some relationship stuff and some village stuff. I try to make sure that I'm keeping that balance kind of consistent with the show. So I have to find like wacky health things like werewolf syndrome and alien hand syndrome and all these odd things that I've put in. But as Rob says, there's Google. But what I do, I must say, I will look up something, but Google now, it gives you the AI result, and I refuse to use that summary. I mean, thankfully it gives you the reference, and so I'll go in and I'll read the reference. And in the story After Effects, where I had a lot of medical procedures, I decided I would keep a reference list because a lot of people were saying, you must do a lot of research. You must do a lot of research. And I thought, how much research do I really do? So I just kept track. It was like 2.5 pages of articles. And that doesn't even count the things like Kathy was saying, like turn on a dime. If I had a nickel for every time I Googled, would a Londoner / English person / Cornish person say or do X, to make sure my idioms would work, because idioms are the worst as far as translating from one language to the next, even if it's English. So yeah, I ask that question of Google a lot.
Right. So where I used to work, we used to have a factory in Birmingham, England, and sometimes doing work with them and talking on the phone, I would hear these phrases, and I'd say, "What does that mean?" And I'm talking to two or three people at the same time, just all pre-Zoom over the phone, and they would have a side conversation. Well, what does that really mean? And they decided they couldn't really explain it. You had to be British to understand it, or you had to be from Birmingham to understand it. Okay, we'll just move on. Yeah. So
I have to ask, does this happen to you guys? I will be so immersed in my writing, I will start thinking with British pronunciation.
oh my.
No.
Yeah, it's like, oh gosh, I'm thinking that way now. It's an advert. It's privacy. It's a zebra. Like, oh my goodness, what is wrong with me? But
Controversy.
yeah, controversy. When I heard Martin Clunes say that on Have I Got News for You, I think, did he get that wrong? Does he not know how that word is pronounced? And I had to look it up. It's like, no, there's different ways of saying it.
Well, like when Lisa said in the beginning, why are we all always so combative? I'm going, combative. Combative,
Yes.
but it's combative. So
Yeah.
different emphasis on different parts of the word.
Chesla, you were going to bring back in that the tools you use, or we were talking about the tools.
Yeah. Yeah. Just with respect to Rob, I think you missed this. I use Microsoft Word and I set it for English United Kingdom. And it catches my spelling errors. And then the read aloud feature is it's just irreplaceable. Because I don't know, you'll find that you'll use the same word multiple times in the same paragraph, and it just doesn't sound right to do that. So you can just tweak a word to make it slightly different, and it's more natural the way a person would be speaking. And then I feel like my readers will hear it in their head better when it's tested that way. And that saved me so many. And how many times have I written Luzia instead of Louisa? So it helps me fix Louisa.
I'll tell you, thesaurus.com was my favorite website.
Yes.
Because I hate repeating the same word over and over because that gets tedious.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to make sure that each synonym works in a sentence or whatever.
Right.
But I use thesaurus.com a lot.
One thing that I found incredibly challenging, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, so much of Doc Martin is a look from Martin Clunes. And they're subtle, right? They're just subtle, like a shape of the eye, the position of the eyebrows, a little brow furrowing, a tiny little smile. It's difficult to write them. There's only so many times you can furrow your brow, or, like that to me is incredibly challenging. And I think it's one of the reasons that it's difficult to write this show.
I think I read Martin say somewhere, that probably some interview, that a look can replace 2 or 3 pages of script.
Yeah.
And they just go with it. And they have actually done that on the day of filming. He says, well, what if I just look like this? It's fun. And they just rip the pages out and throw them away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the description of expressions can be, you tend to use a lot of adjectives.
He's incredibly skilled with his facial expressions.
Yeah.
I'm always just so impressed.
You've learned so much in doing all this writing. What are your thoughts about AI?
Well, generative AI, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I would not enjoy reading somebody's story that they generated. Yeah, I'm not a fan of, I don't think you can call yourself a writer if you're just putting ideas into AI and letting it churn out text. But, you also can't avoid it because, like, if you Google stuff, it helps you find things, right? So it's a tool, right? But generative AI, no.
No.
I would agree. I can see AI could be used as an assistant if you're recording stuff, if you're interviewing someone, if you want a summary. But it all depends upon the root material. If that root material is not any good, what are you going to get? You're going to get Bafflegap, I would think. But yeah, I'm not a fan of AI. I think we were here to use our brains, and human beings can see different things and make connections that software cannot. And Chesla, you said creativity. How do you program creativity?
I want to make sure that people understand. I don't dislike AI. I actually think it's a useful tool. I think it's going to be, it's got its place. So when in fan fiction, or any fiction writing, like, I don't want to see somebody say, I am the author of this story, but they just farmed their ideas into something that churned out their story.
I saw this poster once and said, imagine the people sitting in a conference room and someone said sharks and tornado, and they went with it. And that became, 4 or 5 movies called Sharknado?
Funny.
But they made a lot of money with that goofy idea. Would AI have come up with sharks plus tornadoes? I don't know. But it's kind of strange where, who knows where AI will go. I mean, so I was in a doctor's office and the doctor said, they had their phone and said, okay, by the way, I use AI to record this session and help me write my after visit notes. Is that okay? And we said yes. So if it lets them do their job better and quicker, more efficiently, great. Then they can see more patients and get it right. So I don't know. We'll see where it goes, but I want AI to wash the dishes for me and, trim the bushes. I don't need it to write stories for me.
Yeah. I have used AI to summarize the transcripts of the podcasts, and I'll ask it to give me episode notes that use search engine optimized terms, because I don't know search engine optimization. So I take the transcript of a podcast, so that's all the creative stuff that we've done, and I ask it to give me a summary, and then I'll take that summary as the basis for what I write for episode notes.
Yeah.
And that's remarkably useful. But to me, I don't feel like that's my product. My product is I'm giving it this entertainment of the podcast to the viewers and the listeners, and the episode notes is just kind of giving them a little bit of stuff to tell them what to expect.
Right.
I wanted to make a comment about this. There's so much humanity in your writing, right? You're talking about people and relationships and creativity, and you're talking about the use of your unconscious too, right? You're here, you're there, the ideas are coming forth. And I think there's so much intelligence in that we don't even know, right? Where do your ideas come? We're not quite conscious of that. So I think we do lose access to what isn't yet created if we're only relying on AI.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's just large language models and, existing stuff.
Yeah. Steve Allen was an American writer, TV actor, raconteur, a game show host.
Mm-hmm.
And he said every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And he said, Act 1, introduce your character. Act 2, get him stuck in a tree and throw rocks at him. Act 3, get him out of the tree, which comes from theater, basically. And I thought, that's basically what TV and movies and books are all about. We're creating this play, this ancient art form, if you will, and we carry it forward. And whether it's us writing it or hopefully not AI in the future, is it entertaining? Does it tell a story? Does it inform? Does it amuse? I hope. Does it make us think? And if so, then I guess we've done our jobs. But that said, there's this. I'm going to call it a novel I'm working on, and there's bits and pieces in my head, and some of it's on the hard drive, and some of it's on scribbled pieces of paper, and somehow all that's going to come together at some point. And then, Kathy, I'll have to edit it. I hate editing. I never like to have my stuff edited either, but it will have to happen to make it all fit.
I love to edit.
It is not something I'm comfortable with, because I fall in love with a sentence or a paragraph and the editor says, you don't really need that, or you shouldn't say it that way. And I go, what? That's the best paragraph.
So who does your editing, or do you?
I do, but down the road, somebody, if this magnum opus ever gets put together, gets completed, somebody's going to have to edit it.
I remember somebody saying to me when I was in a writing class and I was worried about publishing some things, because I do have a website called dancingwiththepain.org, and it has different writing on it. And I enjoy writing myself. But if you don't publish it in some form or share it, let's just say share it, then the people who are meant to see it and receive it will be deprived of that. Sometimes we're afraid of the criticism or the reactions. But what about the people all your readers who would have missed your gifts of your stories?
That is true. And here I'll mention the author Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, right? And that was something he was writing and putting on a website. And people said, this is great. Can I buy this in a book? And he kind of self-published it, sort of. And then he wanted to get it on Amazon, and somebody said, you should really get an agent. And he got an agent, and he was looking for a publisher. And then the agent calls him and says, I'm faxing some documents to you. I need you to sign them and send them back. And he looks at it and he says, this is Paramount Studios. They're not a publisher. No, this is for the movie. What? So the movie deal was signed before the book was published.
I didn't realize that.
Because it started on a website, because this story, it just had to come out. It just had to be there. So, these things start in all kinds of places.
My latest story is, in my mind, my latest story is the Doc Martin movie that I want them to make. And because I've fast forwarded it into current time, one of my characters is reading Andy Weir's The Martian.
There you go.
Yep.
There you go.
How about that synchronicity there in our conversation? Well, clearly, though, you have written because you're compelled to write, or you wouldn't be doing it. You're allured. You were allured to do this writing, and you felt such a spark to take all that time. And it's just been wonderful for you to share all of it. Are there other topics or anything else you'd like to discuss or go back to?
I would just encourage readers to, just keep reading and keep commenting, and how much we appreciate you guys. You really make it that much more enjoyable to do this.
Kathy, when you finish a story, how do you feel when you get it wrapped up?
Or how do you know when it's done?
How do you know when it's done?
How do you feel, and how do you know when it's done?
Well, I knew with Just a Glimpse and The Women in His Life, I finished Dr. Doctor probably. I could have gone on, but they were about to have a new season, and I was tired, actually. And my life was getting more complicated, and it was like, I just need to end this. But I could have gone on. And that's how I ended up writing The Women in His Life, was because there was so much more of the story to tell. And actually, I have a sequel to that I could at some point write, but I just haven't. It's in my head. I don't know that it'll ever.
I asked a poet once, how did he know when he was done? He says, when I get to the point I'm just moving commas around, I know it's done. And I said, really? He says, yeah, there's also, I abandon it in place. It's like, I'm done with it. Good enough.
Can't you just feel, though, when it's done? I mean,
yeah.
Because when I started writing what I wanted to write, I thought it was a one-story thing. And then I realized there's no way I can change this man that fast, right? But I still knew when the first story was over. And it just feels like it comes to a spot, right?
Yes, right.
Well, when I started writing Just a Glimpse, I thought maybe 20,000 words, I could get it out by, a quick little story. And it just took on a life of its own. I think it ended properly. It ended at the right spot.
And sometimes that right spot, it's not all tied up. I mean, there's the main idea has kind of come to a nice conclusion, but the subsidiary characters are still out there, and what's going to happen next? I don't know.
Well, I've had other writers ask me, I'm to this point, but I feel like I'm not finished with my story, but I've got other things I need to do. Do you think I can leave it here? And I've told them, yes, I think there may be other things that you could write, but it's at a good stopping point. I think you're fine. Just leave it there. And
I had a couple of times, I don't know if this occurred to you guys, but when I was writing After Effects, I had a chapter that I wrote. I loved it. And then I thought it was the next chapter. And it was like chapter 8, this is where I thought it was. And I was like, no, I can't do that yet because this needs to happen. And then I wrote more. It ended up being something like chapter 18. Like there was so much else that needed to happen before I could get to that chapter that I just absolutely had in my head and I'd kind of pre-written. And then the same thing with the story Some Treat, which happens around Halloween. I had the idea, I wrote the story, and then I realized it's happening too late in the year and the babies haven't been born because, we end the series on Morwenna being pregnant, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I can't just jump to October. She has to have the baby, and my readers will kill me if I don't put that in. Like, if I just jump to it, jump over it. So I had to write a complete low pressure came from that because I needed the baby to be born.
I have used Excel. Okay, if the baby was born in the middle of July, then when did she get pregnant? Kind of back it up using the calendar function. And then, okay, when did she leave Portwenn? And when would she have found, when did Louisa figure out she was pregnant? And blah, 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 so I couldn't just jump.
It drives me crazy when authors aren't consistent like that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm not consistent, I hope you guys let me know. I want to know those things. I wrote a poker scene in one of my stories, and I had to keep an Excel spreadsheet on where everyone was sitting, right? And what they were betting, and what cards were coming up, and who had high hands, so who was going to bet that round.
Right.
And I had to, make out who my winner was going to be and make sure that I didn't use cards that there weren't too many of them in the deck, right? So it's funny, the stuff that you have to do.
That's too much work.
But I'll tell you, it was a blast.
Yeah, it's like, so a friend of mine who was writing a fan fiction she was stuck on, she had never driven manual transmission, and Penhale was in the police rover, and there was problems with the gear shift, and I was trying to, how do you describe shifting gears and stepping on the clutch and letting it out? And it's like trying to write instructions to tie your shoe. It's possible, I've done it, but it's a little complicated, and so you want it to be right. You want it to feel good. I wrote a fan fiction called When Colin Met Nefertiri, because Morwenna and Al discover, surprisingly, that they showed up at a restaurant for their blind date, and there they were. They were each the other's blind date. And anyway, it was like, how am I going to finish this? And at the end of it, it was like they parted company because they ended up having a second date and had a nice dinner, and they had a nice chat and so on, and they were leaving. And I think Al kind of kisses her very gently on the cheek, gives her a hug, and walks away. And Morwenna stands there in the street and thinks, I guess I've got a boyfriend. And that's where it ended. I felt good.
How do you come up with your titles? Because that's been an interesting challenge.
I don't know. Sometimes they write themselves.
I remember writing my first story, and when you put that first chapter out there, it says, what's the title of your story? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't written it yet. I've written one chapter. I don't know what it should be called. And they want a description. Like, I don't know.
I heard an accomplished writer who must remain nameless say, I said, what's the worst part of writing? And they said, the terror of the blank page.
Oh, yeah.
The first word of the first sentence of the first paragraph. And I went, wow, it's not just me.
No, not at all.
How do I get started?
Writing. That's why I just start writing. It could be anything, but eventually it will grow into the story.
I use OneNote, Microsoft OneNote, which is just an interesting little tool. I think you could use anything, but I call it snippets. Mm-hmm. I just write my snippets, and at some point they'll make it into a story or they won't. But it helps you get over writer's block, I think, to just go write something. It doesn't have to be in your thing.
Right.
Sure, there's times of frustration, though, when you're writing. No? There's no frustration?
Yes, there are.
So how do you handle that?
I think at some point I mentioned I painted myself into a corner. I had to get smart, work my way out of it, because that will happen if you're being a gardener, not an architect, right, Chesla? Mm-hmm. And maybe that's where the creativity really kicks in. It's like, well, what's going to happen? Maybe that's when suddenly Bert is outside the window, or okay, there's a way out. I don't know. Or Pippa shows up in the classroom with some disaster, and Louisa has to change what's going on. But I don't know.
It's not always going to flow. I mean, like the story that I'm writing now is so much more difficult than the stories I've written before, because the stories I wrote before, it just picked up where the series ended, and it just kept going, right? So everything that came next was a product of what happened before. The story I'm writing now, because I wanted it to be the movie, in my head, Martin and Louisa and everybody else in town I fast forwarded it 10 years. So I put it into sort of present time, but the people I really fast forwarded were the children. Because at the end of series 10, it was starting to get implausible for Martin Clunes to have a 5-year-old. Right. It just, the ages didn't work with respect to the actors and the ages of the characters. So in my head, it's like we have to get these children and the parents to be closer to what's feasible with the existing actors. So like Caroline Katz, Martin Clunes, they have to have reasonably aged children. Now I have to deal with a 16-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl who've had 10 years of life that has to be created in my head before I can write them as characters. Pardon?
In Cornwall.
In Cornwall, like, I don't know, right? So it's a very difficult thing to write because because I'm such a detail person, I need to write their story for the last 10 years in my head so that I can write them now as the people that they are based on how I created them. So that it's taking me a lot longer to write each chapter now, but it's a huge fun challenge. And I finally decided the first series that I wrote I called What Lies Under the Surface, because it's like there's a lot of stuff going on underneath these people, right? And then there's also what lies. What lies are they telling to themselves, right? So I kind of had two meanings. I'm going to call the next series Forward to the Present instead of Back to the Future. Because it's like I leaped forward in time with a lot of these characters to get us into the present time. And it just...
Well, I love this latest story of yours. So
Thank you.
I don't think I wrote a review yet for chapter 3, but I really like it.
Good. It's tough because, I don't know how people are going to take it. I'm glad you like it.
So I've read online about, people saying, oh my gosh, Doc Martin is over. They need to bring it back. I say, look, in my head, Martin and Louisa and Joe and everybody else, they're still there in Portwenn, right? They're living their lives the best they can.
The camera's
It's all still going on. We just don't see it. And Martin is a little bit nicer than he used to be. He says thank you and please and understands that he's there. This is home, finally. And they go, yeah, but wouldn't you be interested in other stories? And, yeah, but it was a huge story arc, years in the making. And when I think about it, the last episode, the Christmas finale, wow, what a story. And it pulled so many threads together.
Yeah.
And so, hey, it would be neat to see Doc Martin again with those characters, those actors, but it's not going to happen. It's done. Now, if they wanted to write a prequel, maybe I could see that might have a little life, but you know where it's going to end. You know where it's going to be.
Yeah.
I have to say that in series 10 of Doc Martin, when his aunt diagnosed him with his real problem, it explains so much. And I have to wonder, did Philip write that down on a sticky note in the very beginning, or did it just kind of arise organically as time went on? Because it explains an awful lot about Martin. No.
But didn't you kind of see it the whole time? And this might be where like I identify with the character. Like the whole time I was just like, he's just got walls. He's just afraid of all emotion.
Right. Armor.
It's just because you lose them both. If you I'm being completely inarticulate. You can't just block the bad stuff and still have the good stuff. And therefore, he just had, if his life is going to be full, he's going to have to allow the bad stuff. And he's not willing to because it's been so bad his whole life.
Well, he's a man who was, psychologically, if not physically abused as a child. And through his intellect, he got past that. And so, it made sense that he would be a vascular surgeon, top of his game. And of course, it all comes crashing down, right? And then what's he going to do? How's he going to pick up the pieces? And so, of course, he's hurt. He's destroyed with what's happened to his wife. He doesn't want to be in Portwenn, for hell's sake. This smelly, seagull-infested backwater. But he makes a new life. He reinvents himself in that new environment because he has to. Because Martin is a survivor. He had to survive. And so it's when people are coming up and trying to open up the cracks in the armor, open up the windows and doors and try to get into him that he's fighting it, he's resisting it for a lot of times. But there's this teacher that he can't quit looking at her. He can't stop seeing her. That she's the light in the forest, she's gonna, or the wood, if you will, who's gonna get him to salvation. And it's quite a story. I mean, it's quite a character piece.
Like I said, it's very intriguing.
Yeah.
And it makes you just kind of want to keep watching and seeing what's going on with this guy.
Yeah. Why is he doing that?
Yeah, why is he doing that? Yeah.
And therefore write fan fiction about it and the people around him.
Yeah. That's a great place to stop.
Sorry.
Seriously, it's like, just write the fan fiction. If you want the story to live on, this is a way that we can do it.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if there's anybody out there who hasn't read the fan fiction, well, for heaven's sake, find it and start reading.
Yes, if you're not reading the fan fiction, fanfiction.net is where there's a very large amount of Doc Martin fan fiction. Archive of Our Own also has a bunch of it. The fanfiction.net platform is being a little sketchy right now. So, just try to survive that, keep refreshing. It'll eventually get fixed, we hope. But to you guys, Lisa had to drop, but I just want to thank you guys so much for being part of this. I really appreciate you guys not only doing the podcast, but just the writing that you guys did, because you were the inspiration for me to get started. And you have given me great comments and encouraged me to go forward, and I have, really benefited from that. So to everybody who's watching, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope we worked in your questions. Appreciate you guys so much. If you like this episode, please like it online and leave comments, because as you know, I answer the comments, and we have our little community out on YouTube, so please join in. If you haven't supported Buckham Fair, please consider doing that. There's a little short on that. And folks, thank you so much, and thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you, Chesla.
See you, Chesla.
Thanks for joining Podcast Portwenn. Podcast Portwenn is an independent fan production, not affiliated with, endorsed by, or sponsored by Buffalo Pictures, ITV, Fox, or the creators of Doc Martin or Best Medicine.